Welcome back to Paper Simplified. In our last video for this semester, we will simplify the concept of service quality gap model for you. Customer service is largely a function of perception, customer expectations, and service actually provided. If the service provided meets customer expectations, then the customer is satisfied. If the service provided is not up to customer expectation, then the customer is dissatisfied. Dissatisfaction arises due to gaps that arise in customer service. Thus, the gap model helps you identify these service gaps. Jayatmal, Berry, and Parshuraman identified 4 potential gaps within the service organization that may lead to a final and the most serious gap. Service gap, the difference between what the customers expected and what they perceived was delivered. The gap model has been further refined to identify a total of 6 types of gaps that can occur at various points during the design and delivery of a service performance. Let's begin with understanding the gap model. The gray area typically denotes the activities within the company. The first gap is between what the customer's needs and expectations are and how the management defines these needs. The gap is known as the knowledge gap. Not knowing what customers expect. The reason for knowledge gaps are lack of interaction between the management and customers, insufficient communication between contact employees and managers, insufficient market research, lack of market segmentation, and finally, focusing on transactions rather than relationships. The next gap is known as the standard gap. The standard gap or the policy gap is basically not selecting the right service design and standard. The reasons for the gap are poor service design, inappropriate physical evidence, unsystematic new service development process, failure to connect service design to service positioning, and finally, absence of process management to focus on customer requirements. The third gap is known as the delivery gap. It is a difference between specified standard and the delivery team's actual performance on these standards. The reasons for delivery gap are ineffective recruitment, lack of empowerment, perceived control and teamwork, role ambiguity and role conflict, inappropriate evaluation and compensation systems, failure to match supply and demand, and finally, customers' lack of knowledge of their roles and responsibilities. The next gap is known as the communication gap. Communication gap means not matching performance to promises made by the company. Reasons for such gap are tendency to view each external communication as an independent message, not managing customer expectation through all forms of communication, not adequately educating customers, over-promising, that is in promotions and through physical evidence cues, and differences in policies and procedures across branches or units. The next gap is known as the perception gap. The perception gap is the difference between what is delivered and what the customers perceive they have received. Perception gap recognizes that the customers do not always correctly understand what the service is done to them. This situation is likely to occur with current services for which it is difficult to judge service performance even after delivery. For instance, a doctor has to explain to the patient what happened during the operation and what was found and what the patient can expect in the future. The last gap is a service gap. It is a difference between what the customers expect to receive and their perception of service that is delivered. Reasons: this gap is the most critical and the ultimate goal should be narrowing or closing this gap. Gaps in stages 1 to 5 lead to this gap, so the organization should work on those 5 gaps mentioned before. That's the end of the topic. Hope you have simplified the services gap model for you. Do like our video by clicking on the button below. For the complete written answer, log on to www.papersimplified.com. Do register on our website to be updated on the next set of videos for the next semester and follow us on Facebook. Thank you and stay simplified.